Welcome to My Bake Escape. This week I am sharing a recipe for these delicious, adorable mini peach pies. I use frozen peaches for this recipe and store-bought pie crust, so it makes it super easy, but they are so tasty. For the full recipe, visit mybakeescape.com. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Pinterest at mybakeescape. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. I appreciate the support. So as I mentioned, for this recipe, I use frozen peaches. I had a bunch of peaches a few months ago, so I cut them up and froze them, but you can use fresh peaches for this. You will also need cornstarch, granulated sugar, salt, vanilla, and water. So to a large saucepan, I add the frozen peaches. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cook these down to make the filling for the pie. So to the peaches, I add the water, followed by the granulated sugar, then the cornstarch. This is going to thicken the filling, and a little bit of salt. I'm going to add vanilla, but later, so I set that aside. So I mix this together and I begin to cook it over a medium-high heat. This will need to cook for about 7 to 9 minutes until the mixture is nice and thick and bubbly. The mixture has been cooking for about 5 minutes now, and you can see it's starting to bubble up and get nice and thick. Once it reaches this consistency, I remove the pan from the heat. I kind of let these cool down a little bit in the pan. Look at how thick that looks. It's perfect. That cornstarch really helped to thicken up this filling. So now I add the vanilla extract. Then I transfer the peach filling to a heat-proof bowl and let it cool. I am using store-bought pie crust for this. This was in the freezer, so I took it out to defrost a few hours before making this recipe. And unfortunately, every time I use this store-bought frozen pie crust, it tends to crack. So I just gather it all together into a ball. This is easier to do if the crust is kind of room temperature. If you have just pulled it out of the freezer and it's still a little frozen, you may need to let it rest for a little bit so that it's pliable. So I roll it into a nice smooth ball, and then I place it back between the two pieces of wax paper. Using a rolling pin, I begin to roll this out into a nice, large, even, round crust. So for this recipe, I'm using a cupcake pan, and I have a few of these round cookie cutters, so I make sure to get a size that is large enough to fill the entire mold of the cupcake pan. So I went ahead and rolled this pie crust out just a little bit thinner to make sure that I have enough space to cut out 5 of these round shapes, so I can make a total of 5 mini peach pies. So I add a little bit of flour to the top of the pie dough, and I also make sure to dip the cookie cutter in some flour. This just helps cut out those shapes nice and clean. And this is the thickness of the pie dough that I am going to have inside as the bottom. So once I place this into the cupcake pan, I use this small round rolling pin that I have. It has a nice smooth round surface, so I'm using that to just gently press the pie dough into the mold of the cupcake pan. And if you don't have nails like me, you can definitely use the tips of your fingers, but because I have long nails, I went ahead and used this tool. And then you also want to remove any excess pie dough that is sticking out of the top. And this is what it looks like. So then I went ahead and continued pressing in the rest of the pie crusts into the cupcake pan. Now I use Trader Joe's pie crust, and this comes with 2 pie crusts. I only used one for this recipe, but you can double this recipe and use both of them, and that will yield 10 to 12 pies. I also made enough filling to make 10 or 12 pies, but for this video, I just made 5. But if you follow the recipe for the peaches and you use both of the crusts that come in the box of pie crust, you can easily make 10 to 12 of these mini peach pies. So after I press the crusts into that cupcake pan, you'll see that I do have some excess dough, so I go ahead and remove it, but I save it and add it to the remaining dough that I have because I need tops for these mini pies, so make sure to save all of that excess dough. So I combine all of the scraps along with the leftover dough, roll that up into a ball, and then I roll this out into a nice round. And this is going to be for the top, so I set that aside. These little mini pie crusts need to be blind baked, so that means I'm going to start them off in the oven for a few minutes just so that the crust is completely cooked by the end of the baking process. So to do this, I fill each of the pie crusts with a cupcake liner, and I have these pie weights. I have a link in the description of this video to pie weights that you can order online, but you can also use raw beans if you don't have pie weights. So this is going to help keep the pies flat and bake nice and even in the oven, and they won't get all bubbly and shrink down. And so these are going to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then while those bake, I went ahead and made the egg wash. So this egg wash is going to be brushed on top of the pies before they bake. It's going to create that nice golden brown crust. So to 1 egg, I added a little bit of water and I went ahead and mixed that together. So the pie crusts have been baking for about 10 minutes. So remove them from the oven. And then I carefully remove the cupcake liners with the pie weights from the crusts and place those pie weights back in my jar. Be careful because everything is still warm from the oven. So as you can see, the crusts are not cooked completely. They are a different kind of a pale color because they have cooked slightly. So the next step is to add that delicious peach filling to each of the crusts. You want to add enough of this filling so that it reaches the top. You don't want to overfill these. So just make sure you put just enough so that the pie filling reaches the top of the pie crust. This filling would also be very good on maybe some yogurt for breakfast with some granola, or even top ice cream with it. It would be delicious. If you have leftover filling, don't worry, you can use it for other delicious treats. Now that the filling has been added to each of the pies, it's time to work on the tops. So I roll out that dough a little bit thinner, and I'm using a round biscuit cutter, and I just want to make sure it is the right size. You want it to be large enough just to cover the tops, and it is. So I make sure to add some flour and then cut out 5 rounds. So I place each of these rounds on top of the pies. If you notice, I did spill a little bit of that peach filling in one of the empty cupcake molds, so I went ahead and cleaned that up, because if I don't, it will burn pretty quickly in the oven and it'll make me feel like my pies are burning. So if you make a spill, just clean it up. It'll help ensure that it doesn't burn and get sticky in the oven. So to seal the tops to the bottoms of the pies, I use a fork and I gently press the edges. This just really helps seal that top part to the bottom. And then I use a small knife to cut about 4 slits on the top of each of the pies. This will allow air to release as the pies bake. So before these go in the oven, I go ahead and brush some of that egg wash on top of each pie, making sure to get the top and the edges. This is going to give these pies a nice golden brown finish. Then I sprinkle a little bit of granulated sugar on top of each of the pies. These are going to bake in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. You just want to bake them until they are nice and golden brown, and you will start seeing that filling kind of bubbling out of the edges. And this is what they look like when they're finished. You want to let these cool in the pan for about 10 minutes because they are going to be very hot. That filling is very hot, so be careful. I very carefully and gently use a fork to kind of get those pies out. Some of them did stick a little, so I just run a butter knife along the edges, and that helped remove them. Then I transfer them to a cooling rack to continue to cool. I love the way these turned out. They look so cute and they are delicious. The crust is perfectly golden brown. It's flaky and buttery and complements that peach filling. These are so delicious. I enjoy pie all year long, and there's nothing like fresh baked pie. These are great just like this, but if you have vanilla ice cream on hand, you can always add a scoop to take these to another level. You can also add some whipped cream or enjoy them just like this. They are delicious. If you want to make these, be sure to visit mybakeescape.com for the full recipe. And if you do make this, let me know in the comments what you think of the recipe. Also, if you have any questions, be sure to leave those in the comments as well, and I will try my best to respond. Thank you so much for watching, and have a sweet day.